Good.
All right, good evening, everyone, or afternoon. This is a work session on DRHS facilities and upgrades, as well as some other general updates. So I'll start off by turning it over to Commissioner Perrin to give us some updates on some of the facilities.
Sure. Just to provide an overview of both of the facilities that we're talking about, which are the Honorable Loretta C. Scott Center for Human Services, as well as the Rochester Community Sports Complex. So starting with the Honorable Loretta C. Scott Center for Human Services, that's the one that's located at 5557 St. Paul Street. Just as by way of overview, the city purchased it in 2019 from SUNY Brockport. Before that, I believe it was referred to as their Metro Center. It's a very interesting building, a beautiful building. It's 107 years old. It was built in 1915, and there was an addition added to it in 10 years later. In terms of the total size, it's pretty, large, as you would imagine. Anybody who's been in there, 6 floors, about 110,000 square feet. And it definitely has a lot of historical significance. It was originally the Chamber of Commerce building, so that's why it's called the Chamber Building. And it was a gift to the community from George Eastman. It was designed by famed Rochester architect Claude Bragdon. Was just at a meeting earlier today on the Louise Slaughter Rochester station, which was a recreation of the Bragdon designed, or took its inspiration from the Bragdon designed train station that had originally served the city. And this building is also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In terms of completed capital projects, the first one was a phase one at about $750,000, which was initial renovations and the relocation of the Department of Recreation and Human Services into the building. That included design and construction, oversight services, abatement and air monitoring, painting, carpet replacement, some floor plan modifications, lighting upgrades, new furniture, management of the move into there, and just the general overall relocation, things you'd expect to see when you're starting to move a department into a new building. In addition, for a little less than $50,000, a building condition assessment was completed, and that was really to evaluate the current building systems, make some recommendations for major repairs and replacements, really just identify what those capital needs were and establish cost estimates and some prioritization. And that's a lot of what we used as our base and still do in terms of identifying capital improvements to work cooperatively with the Department of Recreation and Human Services on prioritizing and doing. It identified over $15 million of capital needs. I want to restate that, $15 million of capital needs. This is a building that it shows its age, right? It's there. So some of the capital projects that are currently underway, one is what we're calling building system priority 1. It was funded in the 21-22 budget, so last year's budget, at an amount of $665,000. And it really identified what the building services and architectural services would term high priority HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and sort of the life safety system items. We have a list that's now being reprioritized by that team based on items that were addressed prior to the funding. Some of those were already done. We're also looking at roof repairs, and these are strictly maintenance at $44,000. Those are funded in the current year's budget, and we show an additional $173,000 for completion in fiscal year 23-24. As all members of council are probably aware, but it's worth always noting that any of the out years, i.e. those years that are not the current year's budget in the CIP, are for informational purposes. So at this point in time, we have consultant procurement complete. The design is going to be undertaken this fall, which is really now, depending on how you look at it, either after Labor Day or the 20th or 21st of this month. And the construction would be anticipated, if that funding is included in next year's CIP. That's when it would take place. There's also an annual allocation for the building of $100,000. And again, this is for what I would term on-the-spot repairs, some maintenance efforts that we know we have coming up, but for which don't deserve their own dedicated line item. And again, any type of emergency project that's not captured in the capital request. We do have some capital projects that are what I will term in the queue. These include the building automation system controls, and that's really the evaluation and expansion of existing building automation to eliminate some of the older controls that are at the end of their useful life. We're just initiating that now. It is funded in the current year for design at $156,000. And again, if the funding were to be included in next year's CIP, as of right now, it would be a little over $1,035,000 in fiscal year 23-24. There's also a lot of work that needs to be done in the basement. I think, I'm providing you sort of the hardscape, if you will, look at it. But I think Commissioner Green and her staff can speak to this. If you go into the basement, you're going to see that the basement and sub-basement both have structural and waterproofing needs, as well as, again, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or HVAC. Again, this is in for design right now that we're initiating at about $1.125 million in the current year, with about $4.5 million is what we're thinking we're going to need next year. And again, I should mention, just it's always worth restating at this point in time, the volatility that we're seeing in the bidding environment is just unheard of. It's not just materials from a strictly supply and demand perspective, it's also labor. So a lot of these things will be re-estimated as we go through. But again, this is really water mitigation and those coordinated replacements, because there are other mechanicals for the HVAC systems that are in the basement. We have capital projects that require future funding. We have elevator upgrades at about $2.2 million, and that would be full replacement of all 3 of the existing elevators, 2 passenger, 1 freight. There's the building envelope and exterior. You have the structural, kind of bones, and then the envelope and exterior, if you want to think of it as sort of the skin and some of the muscle that goes around those types of things. That would be window repairs and replacement, brick and stone repairs, and that includes the decorative cornices and balcony railings. And then we have the priority 1 and 2 code and structural repairs. That's where we're talking some significant funding, upwards of what we're looking at now, around $5 million. Again, that would be structural repairs, life safety, exit and egress lighting, lighting upgrades and controls, any requirements that are still outstanding for the Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, and then fire alarm system upgrades. So again, when we talk about that, the code and structural, we're really talking about safety systems. I'm going to pause there. I do have Chris McManus from our Architectural Services Group who's on. Unfortunately, Chris is more than capable, but Laura Civiletti and Lillian Forte, who are going to join, both are unable to do so because of family situations. So before moving on to the Rochester Community Sports Complex, I will pause there to see if there's any questions that I may be able to answer at this time.
Any questions from council members at this point?
I do, yes.
Councilmember Gruber, go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Commissioner Parent and Commissioner Green and everyone for being here today. Just a little context from my perspective. Both of these facilities came up during the budget conversation because these are both 2 fairly new facilities, the former chamber building and the former soccer stadium that the city has acquired in the last, just in my tenure on council, so the last 4 or 5 years. And part of what I want to try to understand is, I guess there's 3 things. Programming, I want to hear about that. I'm excited to hear what DRHS has to say. But the other 2 are, number 1, the investments we have to make in the building. And you just talked about some of that, Commissioner Parent. It sounds like what you said was there's a study or an analysis that shows all of the upcoming investments. And whatever is shareable with council, I think it'd be very helpful for us to see. And then number 2 is the revenue that we're intending to be able to generate from these buildings, which I think is, that to me is the real unknown, the real question mark here. Certainly the youth sports complex, when we acquired that building, talked a lot about ways that we can program the space, ways that we can actually get Section 5 to be able to pay the city to host some big events, etc. Looking forward to that. We never really talked about that when it came to the chamber building. And meanwhile, I know that there are some rentals there. We are renting out some space to some organizations. Can someone give a little bit more context about that specifically in the chamber building? How much of the facility is currently rented? How much more of it do we intend to rent? is there any opportunity that the revenue from rentals is ultimately going to help to truly pay for the ongoing maintenance of this building? Not fixing the elevators for $2.5 million, of course, but the ongoing maintenance. That seems to me to be a place where we really don't have a whole lot of information. So I'd love to pause there and get some feedback.
Okay,
So
if I may, then I would just like to maybe suggest that we just handle building by building, rather than, jump in on, both of these at the end. So if it's okay, I can do the sports complex after we address Council Member Gruber's questions. And for what we can share, we will definitely look into it. I can also talk about what some of our costs have been on this over the last couple of years. So you can see, or over the last year, what we've spent for those. But what I would like to do is turn it over to Commissioner Green. And I do want to say too, in the short tenure that I've been working with Commissioner Green, and in every conversation we have about this, her entrepreneurial spirit comes through. She is consistently looking for ways to generate revenue on these things. And I don't mind saying that because, and some of those are difficult conversations about saying, well, do we do this or do we do that? And in each case, she always comes back to, yeah, but I can get money out of these if we do what I'm proposing. And I know things have to be done from the structural standpoint. So if it's okay, if you'd like to stay on the chamber building, excuse me, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Green for some of those questions, and to Councilmember Gruber's request of DES. I'll look at what we have for our currently planned investments for the buildings to get those over to you. But I think your other two things, the programming and the revenue generation, are more closely coordinated, and I'll let Commissioner Green take over, and I can go ahead and catch my breath. So thanks very much.
So thanks, Commissioner Perrin. And so I will add some information to the chamber building and address some of the questions that Councilmember Gruber just posed. So the first and second floor of the building, DRHS house, the majority of our department is here in this building. On the second floor is our youth services. So we have a teen center, and we have I don't know where that's coming from, sorry. We have our MBK engagement center here in the building. And so during COVID, we did not have a lot of usage of those two spaces because of the limits that we were under with CDC guidelines. But we are using the building for our youth services. We are currently looking to do some work on the third floor to build out for classroom space. So even this summer, when we had some of our youth development training, we had to utilize other facilities. And so using that space would allow us to have our youth programming right here when it comes to our growth and development trainings. Some of that work happens in rec centers, but also we have smaller programs that are housed here in the building. So the first floor has our crisis intervention unit on it, and that encompasses our community support counselors and our PIC team. And so we could have a number of residents coming in and out of the building to meet with those individuals to receive services. So that's the DRHS component. Then we have on the third floor, we currently have Rochester Works, which they are paying a monthly fee of a little over $3,000 a month. We also house on that floor Project Search, which is a partnership with the Rochester City School District. They are housed on the third floor. And then we have, as you all know, violence prevention has grown out. So we have Pathways to Peace and ONS on the third floor. So that pretty much takes up the third floor. Commissioner Perrin mentioned about me looking for opportunities. So our fourth floor currently is not used. And so we've talked about trying to get that space equipped so that it can become a rental area. It's open space. So in order to rent it, we would need to do some work around creating office space, classrooms, cubicles, whatever we would need to make it rentable. And so right now it's not. So that fourth floor is pretty much vacant. And then we do have in the lower level, which the basement level, We have Lero, who's using the space. It is being used. They're part of a partnership, so there's no rental there. We also have Redco in the building, and as many of you know, there was an agreement about when we took over the building with Redco, so they are housed in the lower level of the building. We have had conversations about utilizing the 4th floor for training. That Office of Human Resource Management is looking for a training site temporarily. We've also talked about using the space for career to pathways and public safety on that 4th floor. So we're having conversations around how to utilize all the spaces in the building. And when you talk about, are we making money from the building currently, as I said, the only place that we are currently renting and receiving income is only from Rochester Works. We have a number of other folks who have reached out to us who are interested in having space in a downtown location. And so we're having those conversations with a couple of folks there. But in order to do that, as Commissioner Perrin talked about, we may have to do some work to make it ready-made for someone else to rent the space. Those are some of the things around 57.
Commissioner Green, if I may follow up really quick. I know that there's been a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving programs. Because I recall Pathways, for example, was on the 1st floor. I know they moved. Are we adequately, do we have adequate furniture and accommodations in the St. Paul building? Or do we need, has there been investments in making sure that when we move all these things around that we have what the staff needs in the building? So
as you know, both Pathways to Peace, ONS, and Person in Crisis team has grown. So you're correct that Pathways to Peace used to be on the 1st floor. That has transitioned out, and because we've grown Person in Crisis and Crisis Intervention, that space that they were using is now Crisis Intervention Services. Then when we moved Pathways to Peace and ONS on the 3rd floor, we did have to purchase office supplies for them, office desk and chairs and all of that. So those 2 departments were provided some funding source so that they can equip themselves. We're having conversations about them because they're growing rapidly, that how do we best utilize the space there? If you've ever been on the 3rd floor, there's a large hallway space, and certainly we can create cubicles and office spaces in that area. And so that's what they have been doing. There are 4 classrooms in that space. 2 of the classrooms are being used for Pathways to Peace and ONS for some of their work. The other 2 classroom spaces are not furnished for actual classroom. That's what we're looking at, working on creating training spaces for youth development in those other 2 spaces. And then there's another set of area that if we could get some work to, that could be rental space as well.
So just one final question. I don't know, I saw Councilmember Gruber came off mute. I don't know if you had an additional question, but related to marketable space, if there's additional space available or potentially available in the future, and we can help in some way support the marketing of the space, I would just want to know what the opportunities might be and how we could share that with the public.
So we've had folks reach out to us that have actually, we've given them tours of the space to say, this is what we currently have. Some of it has been because there's no office space in the areas. How can we do some work to make it ready-made for that? I've had conversations with Commissioner Perrin already about some of that. What would it cost for us to do that work? And it would be more of our return on our investment. So we would put some some money up front to make it ready-made, but then we recoup that money on the backside as part of rental property. And so we're having those conversations. We, like I said, we brought a couple of people over. Our priority has been city needs. And so as other people are coming to say, we would like to rent the space, we're mindful of the fact that there's some city departments that we have to make sure that they can fit in the space, because that would be our priority, to house our own first.
Yeah, and I would also just add to that as well, that one of the current tenants in the building is our resident project representation for the plaza work that's being done to the west along the river. So on both sides of the river. So the Lero group is there right now. And so if we weren't providing that space to them, then their contract would just be that much more for them to have a field office. That's another consideration as well, as some of that, and that gets to what Commissioner Green had referred to as, looking at city needs, and also looking at when that project's over, they'll be gone. We've also even looked at moving them into smaller space if need be, to increase revenue generation in the near term while that capital project is still going on along the river.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, I guess this is all really helpful information from both commissioners, and I'm appreciative. Frankly, I think that the last administration, I don't know that there was a full amount of due diligence done on the old chamber building in terms of the long-term capital needs. I'll just tell you that my sense is that when this opportunity came up, and correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Parent, but I would assume you noticed we bought this for $1, right?
I'm not sure how much. I think I'd have to look at what we paid for it. I think it was actually probably, I see James shaking his head. My understanding was we might have paid a couple million for it.
Well,
More than $1, yeah. It was $1 million, I think, it's $1 million plus.
but wasn't there the transaction between the city and Redco? Do you recall him talking about there, James?
Correct, yeah, correct.
So Redco ultimately purchased the building. James, that was a question for.
Oh, I said correct. Yeah, I said correct.
Okay.
It was a conveyance that involved a Redco, SUNY, the city. Yeah, and
Yeah.
there also was revenue anticipated at the time, potentially through a partnership with BOCES and the city school district that the prior commissioner had been working on, that did not work out. So that revenue stream that had been talked about, Councilmember Gruber, didn't materialize.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm really trying to get at here is I would very much appreciate it if this administration, and I understand Commissioner Parent, Commissioner Green, this is a building that you inherited, and you're figuring out how to make it work the best way you possibly can. But I would really ask us to maybe do some work over the course of this year to just sharpen the pencil, so that we have an understanding as a council of what the carrying cost of this building is. And I'm not talking about the long-term capital needs. I understand any building that we acquire that's as old and frankly as beautiful but old as this building is going to have some significant capital needs and improvements required. But what is the actual carrying cost, and what are the potential and realized revenues to be able to get out of it? By no means do I anticipate for a building like this to quote unquote make money for the city. I don't think that's what we're in the business of. But I really do think that we need to begin to understand what it means to have this building long term, especially if we're going to need to make some really significant capital investments. Things like elevators. I get we need elevators. We need to be ADA compliant. There's no doubt about that. I also think that we need to have a pretty clear sense of what the annual carrying cost of this building is going to be before we decide when to be able to make those really significant investments. And I just don't feel like we know those answers right now. And maybe no one does. But can we spend some time this year in anticipation of the 2024 budget trying to figure out what that formula is?
Yeah, we can do that. I can share that. One of the things that we put together in advance of this meeting and working with building services, and again, this was something that Lillian Forte had pulled together, was what I will call those carrying costs are for the 3 years that we've had the building. And so in the first year, which would have been fiscal year 1920, and in each instance, we're looking at stockroom materials, building service maintenance, which is that which we conduct, contractor maintenance. So there's building service maintenance, what we do ourselves, the contractor maintenance, and that can be things that we just don't do as much of in-house. They may be more complex than what we can handle. And then there's also the heat, light, and power. In fiscal year 1920, the total was about 290,000. In 2021, which again would have been COVID, was about 266,000, and this past year was 387,000 and change. The primary difference was really the heat, light, and power. Heat, light, and power for the building, and this would be a function again of if you have more activities in the building, you're going to need more heat, light, and power. But that went from about 96,000 in 1920 to about 125,000 in 2021, and then to about 210,000 in 21-22. Stockroom materials really vary based on what we need and also how long we have it. Building service maintenance has actually gone down. We'd have to dig into that number. In the first year, it was about probably 40 to 45,000. And my guess is that's because we got into the building and said, okay, what can we do? It was also the highest year of contractor maintenance. In subsequent years, that amount has declined in each instance by quite a bit, actually, with a bit more contractor maintenance in 21-22. I always say one data point does not make a trend. I think 3 years is okay. We really need to do a deep dive, but that's what you're looking at generally. If we look at a carrying cost for that building and it's similar to what it's been and what will be close to a full year of operation in 21-22, we'll have a better idea as we get through this year, this current fiscal year. But if we're up at that air range, I would estimate that, you know, we could be at, you know, 500,000. And I may be wrong because you know, we're basing it on this, you know, some very odd years in a short amount of time that we've had it. But to answer your, I think what you're looking for, Councilmember Gruber, that's what it is. The most, you know, recent year was a little under 400,000, and half of that, over half of that, probably about 55 to 60% was heat, light, and power, which is just your utilities.
Great. So with that, I think I'm gonna, in the interest of time, move us on to the sports complex facility and do the same thing, do the update there, and then we'll have some additional questions.
Okay, I can do a similar, try to, you know, standardize this a little bit. So in terms of the overview, the stadium itself is 16 years old. The suites were added in 2008 after being constructed in 2006. The McGuire building is 34 years old, built in 88, had a major addition in 1997. In terms of what you're looking at for size, the stadium really isn't so much square feet, isn't the best way to do it, but it does have capacity for 13,768 attendees or participants over 9 acres, and the McGuire building itself is a little over 25,000 square feet. You know, originally it was built as Paytech Park, funded by New York State, City of Rochester, and the Rochester Rhinos. And obviously, based on the name Paytech Communication had purchased the naming rights. It's gone through several other names. I think what's notable is if we think of the Chamber building and it being designed by Claude Bragdon, this was designed by HOK Sport, which is now Populous. Populous is probably the premier sports arena and stadium designer in the country. I believe they're actually the ones who are working for Pagula Sports Entertainment right now for the new Bills Stadium. I'm about 75 to 80% certain on that. So this is another one of these buildings where, you know, again, it has its costs. It has, you know, we have to work obviously towards revenue generation and uses, but even this past weekend, as I'm sure Commissioner Green will touch on, we're getting stuff in there. But again, it's another one that's notable in terms of who designed it. In terms of recently completed capital projects, the majority of that was actually the only one was McGuire building renovations at about 1.9 million. That was the renovation of the former locker room, doing offices, stadium ticket booth, and the city surplus into a sports training facility. And that included about a little less than $500,000 of the total $1.9 million cost was grant funding. In terms of projects, again, that are in the queue, we have the stadium stair nosing replacement. For those that may not be aware, obviously stairs, hopefully you can see this go like this. The nose is that edge. They usually have a non-slip material there to prevent any type of hazards. That's what we're looking at. That's funded this year at about 141,000. So that would be all of the stair nosing throughout the stadium, including the 4 stair towers to the suite level. There's capital projects, again, that require future funding. We'll need a roof replacement. You're going to hear this a lot as we go through all of our capital needs. Roofs, just like any other structure, whether they're private residences or the like, run out. The current one is estimated about $900,000. Keep in mind, though, this is in more than 25,000 square foot roof system. We also have HVAC replacements, again, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning at about $650,000. And so that would be over 30 fan coil units, a lavatory ventilation system. And again, this is all based on age and condition that we're projecting the need to make these improvements. The sprinkler system assessment, we want to look at that. That would be about $50,000. That would evaluate the current system related to the piping, sprinkler heads, fire pump, and any other fire protection and suppression appurtenances that would go into that. And then field lighting upgrades. This is something that you see regularly for stadiums as they go through it. Lighting gets better. So we would want to do, as we look to a lot of things that are sustainable, we want to look to an LED technology in order to reduce the annual operating costs, as well as lamp replacement, or I should say, as it relates to lamp replacement and energy consumption, and that would be about $540,000. There's other things that include gravel parking lot improvements, an AV system assessment. Again, that audio visual equipment is key if we want to use this for certain types of programming, particularly in winter months. Stadium suites finishes and FFE, furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. And that would be to generally finish upgrades to the 14 suites in the press box. We have a grass overflow parking lot if we wanted to improve that. And again, we'd be looking at that for new drainage as well as paving and striping at about 1.3 million. I think, as we go through this, we would look to see what we could do from the standpoint of porous surfaces as opposed to impervious surfaces that increase that runoff. And then we have an annual allocation for the building of $100,000. And again, that's for those repairs, maintenance efforts, and emergency projects that are not captured in our capital requests. So that was the 5-minute overview, but I think it gives you 90 to 95% of where we're thinking. The rest of these things, again, are in the current CIP that's shown that goes out to 2026, 2027. And for questions related to programming and revenue generation, those are things that I'll turn over to Commissioner Green. Thank you.
So I will go ahead and start, and then if there's additional questions, certainly we'll take those questions. But in terms of the sports complex, it is a year-round facility. It's open every day of the week. We have a number of youth programs, sports programs, training programs, just about everything, all the sports you can think of. We have lacrosse, soccer, basketball, just everything there. There's also a training room, a weight room, a walking track. There are basketball courts and indoor soccer field. So the McGuire building is used year round. Then when we talk about the soccer stadium, we have, someone mentioned Section 5. Several of the Section 5 games are held there. Eric is working on trying to even be a host site for Section 5 football. We have the Union Soccer Club that regularly plays there. As Commissioner Perrin mentioned, past weekend, we had the Drum Corps Association there. And so we constantly have opportunities to use the soccer stadium as a revenue generating space for us. There was a question around KPIs. There are KPIs around the sports complex. And if you looked at what we submitted in the budget, we exceeded those KPIs. The attendance at the sports complex has exceeded their expectations in just the 1 year. As you know, we haven't had it fully operational because of COVID, but this year the numbers they came in very high. And we anticipate that those numbers will continue to increase. Constantly, people are reaching out to be a part of the sports complex and always looking for ways to bring in their training programs, tennis coming in, anything that's sports related. But the thing to note about the sports related items is that people are not coming in just to play sports. It's really about the training, growth and development to make the young people better, not just better athletes, but better all around people. And so I don't want it to be focused that all we do is sports. In the McGuire building, there is a room for training, so you can do all your practices, but then you can come in the room and go through training around that. So those are many of the things that's happening there. I'm going to ask Eric if there's some other things that you want to share in terms of programming. When you talk about revenue generated, we're starting to see the revenue, but certainly over time, you'll see a greater use of that. But Eric?
Yes, I second what Commissioner Green shared. I think one of the most important pieces that we're doing around athletics is providing information regarding what requirements are needed to attend college through athletics. So I think that's very important for kids to understand what requirements are needed academically, physically, etc., early, rather than waiting till they're in high school and half of their requirements have passed by them. So we're doing a good job of educating the community, providing access to them, having spaces and places to get really good training and learn how to take care of their bodies and learn what it is to be a complete student athlete. And I'm really excited that we're bringing rugby in, which is one of the fastest growing sports for scholarships in this area. So I'm excited.
Yeah, if I could, if you're set, Eric, I can just speak quickly to the to sort of our ongoing or carrying costs for that one. Again, going back to fiscal year 18-19 through the last fiscal year that ended June 30th this year, fiscal year 21-22. Our costs in terms of expenses on building services have ranged from a little less than 300,000, about 299,000, to just over 338 or just over 341,000. Excuse me. So, and again, the largest cost center there continues to be heat, light, and power. And contractor maintenance and building service maintenance is called in as needed. So that's where we are in terms of the sort of the ongoing maintenance costs that are covered under building services and related contractors.
Just one of the other pieces I want to add about programming is the sports complex is open for residents. And so there was a lot of talk about we don't have a Y downtown and a walking track or training room or weight room. But the opportunity for residents to go to the sports complex is available to use that as their fitness location, a safe space. There's security around the clock over there. And so it is another opportunity for residents who are interested in health and wellness to be a member of the sports complex, just like we have memberships at our centers.
Great, thank you for the update on that. I'll open it up to council members. Any questions so far related?
I guess I would just echo my previous, and maybe this is something President Melendez that we can work on with James and Katie as well. Just thinking through how to get a handle on what the carrying costs and anticipated revenues are, knowing that there's so much fluidity. I mean, it's great to hear Section 5. That was certainly one of the visions from the beginning here, that Section 5 was going to use the facility. It's great to hear that's happening. I have no idea what that functionally means from a anticipated revenue perspective, and hopefully it continues to grow. So I think I don't have any other questions for the sake of this work session. This has been very helpful, and I really appreciate all the information. but I do think that we should probably put together some specific questions, maybe that we can just ask come budget time, so that we have a sense of what these buildings cost, not just for these buildings for what it's worth, but also because inevitably, as we all know, there will be additional opportunities for new buildings that come up all the time over and over again. And I think we need to really be able to weigh what the right decision-making matrix is there.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think we can certainly package something. In addition to that, I just wonder, this is really premier space in our community. And there's certainly a similar conversation that we were talking about with the McGuire building in terms of space for BOCES or collaboration with the district, et cetera. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to further explore how these amenities can be utilized by the district or even charter schools for that matter, in terms of a revenue generating opportunity. Because I know that there's some facilities that either the district has or charter schools have that lack the sports amenity part of it. And I just see that as a potential opportunity for the city. Any additional questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Pio.
Thank you, President Melendez. This might be far outreach and outlandish idea, but is there any possible way that we can steal the Bills training camp? Bring them there?
I would
You
say,
expecting me to answer that question?
Any possible way, or the Seahawks, either one. I'm good with either one.
We'll put that on our list, Councilman Member Pio.
Appreciate it.
Maybe that stadium design thing, it's the same company. We can try to leverage that. Never know. All right. Any additional questions?
Yeah, just one, might be a little bit out there, but there was certainly talk when we first acquired this building and started to put some work into it. There was definitely talk of a dome and what it would look like to dome it and have it available for year-round purposes. Is that, and I know that the expense was just absolutely monumental. And so I don't know that it was ever pursued, but I do think there were some conversations with funders around it. Has there been any continued conversations around a dome, or is that something that we should assume is off the table at this point?
there have been none to my knowledge, and I think now is a good time to state something that this just you alluded to it, Councilmember Gruber, when you talked about the purchase of the chamber building to begin with, which is we have over 190 facilities right now, and that includes firehouses, police stations. We have a lot to take care of. All of these things require it. It's nice to have new things. It's nice to go out and acquire, but we really have to take a very strong look at what our asset management policy is. We also, I'm going to throw out there, need to start to consider strategic divestment of some of these facilities. Are they still an asset? If they're not providing us with a rate of return, and that's not all dollars and cents. It can be response times when it comes to public safety. But the reality is that we have aging infrastructure. This council saw it when we came to council, and I think it was maybe March for the assessment of the firehouses. Average age of 70, 75 years old. We really have to start looking at what's needed and what may be a want. And I'm not saying that a dome is one way or the other. All I'm saying is when I hear, well, we're looking at other buildings, it sends a little shiver down my spine, because I know the condition of these facilities. I'm seeing them. We have some of the best people, I think, out there who are working on this on a daily basis on behalf of the city and architectural building services. And we're at a point where the numbers that we're putting up there are for duct tape and bubble gum just to keep things held together. We're dealing with this on a daily basis. It's not even a weekly basis. Where's the next leak going to spring in a roof? What's the next thing that we're going to have to look at to put a basement at a point where Brian Liberty's on this, where building services and under his direction at Building and Parks is going to have to take care of something, and it all costs money. And so I'm just going to put that out there, that we have a very large, what I will call, inventory of facilities that continues to age, and we have some of the oldest inventory, I think, out there, particularly relative to some of what I'll call the non-mature and emerging suburbs. So this is a lot. Anything we do, I think that we add, we're going to have to look to see what we can take away. Otherwise, we're going to have this continually growing deficit of needs that we just can't get to and address.
And we certainly understand that part of it. And, you know, with that, I don't see any additional questions from council members. So,
Hey, well, Mr. President,
Councilmember Lightfoot, yes.
for the record, Eric was, you know, he called me out. So I'm at the sports guard. I'm out here right now. I just stopped in, got a beautiful tour of this facility. I pulled up on them. Yes, I did. And we're here and it's beautiful. You guys need to come down and take a look at it.
Thank you for jumping in right away on that. Can't call him out, Eric. You can't do that.
It was off the record. It was off the record.
All right, so with that, I appreciate everyone's time and the update. Certainly, we're going to be asking for more information as we get further into the year and anticipate some additional asks related to the budget. But we're thankful that you're able to give us this update and all the progress that we're making in these two facilities. So thank